a lot of times people want to stick this to the men and be like, oh, if a man has a bad day and he physically harms you, blah, blah. But a lot of times people forget that women also commit domestic violence. Women also physically abuse their male partners. And I know that someone who's going to come out and be like, oh, but the stats for women who are victims of domestic abuse are much higher. And for men, it's like 2 or 3%. But in as much as people never really point out this statistic,
the royal penis is clean, Your Highness.
Welcome to the Breaktime Podcast, where I talk about love, sex, and relationships from a guy's perspective, as well as a bunch of other guy shit. The man on the mic is a man who might find it hard to breathe if you've got that asthma. He is also a man whose sickness for the thickness prevents him from skinny dipping. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. The episode has come through with more deep than I'm normally used to, but guess what? We're talking about feelings today, and I kinda have to go there. And you might even end up feeling a little bit of those feelings. But as usual, I do intend on talking about things from a guy's point of view, from a young guy's point of view. And as usual, if you agree, if you disagree, if you want to give your feedback, or if you want to suggest some topics, then the place to hit me up on is through the social media or the very first link in the description, which says give feedback here, which will give you direct access to me, and whatever it is that you would like to say will end up landing on my desk via fan mail. Now, with that said, considering that this is a Friday episode, it means that I have to dive into the wonderful world of X so that I can get a couple of things to discuss, much as they are more unpopular opinions on dating. And as usual, if you see a tweet that you want us to discuss, if you see a tweet that's on X or IG or Facebook, and I'll discuss how and where you can send it to, then you can submit it to me so that I can break it down and discuss it in a way that I normally like to. It's pretty simple, almost sounds like a song, and it goes like this. You see that tweet, you like that tweet, you want us to discuss that tweet, you send that tweet. You send it to the DMs of @BagakaTheD, which happens to be my personal Twitter handle, and I will take it from there and I will handle it accordingly on Facebook or on IG. If it happens to be a screenshot, a screen grab, or if it ended up on a reel, then the place to send it to is @The Breaktime Podcast on Facebook or @TheBreaktime_podcast on IG. The DMs are always open, and I will take it from there and I will handle it accordingly. Now, with all the unpopular opinions that I want to get into, I do want to go straight in there. But before I can do that, I first want to clear something that I saw on IG that I've been meaning to talk about, but it's literally just been sitting in my folder for a while. Now, it's a clip from the It's Related I Promise podcast, or IRIP podcast, and it involves a couple of people busy talking about money and friendships. Now, it was a clip that I saw a couple of people that I follow who also follow me busy posting it up on their stories a bit of a while back, and they're busy talking about how profound it is and how much of an interesting discussion and topic it seems to be. But personally, I felt like it's not something that's that big. But either way, considering that I am someone that talks about relationships in some way, shape, or form, I figured I might as well talk about it. So I'm just gonna let the clip play, then I'll give my thoughts on it. So without further ado,
can you be broke and have
certain friendships?
What happens when somebody is in the pits, and not for 1 month, maybe for years?
In my opinion, I feel like there are seasons for friendship. There are seasons when it comes to how your pockets also look like. And if your friendship is strong enough, I think it's extremely possible.
There's no handbook on how to say, I want to be there, I want to celebrate you, but I cannot afford this. And still walking away from that conversation with dignity.
I don't have fear around saying I'm broke. And maybe not using the word broke. At the moment, I can't. I've chosen who I surround myself with. Very, very clearly. I'm very aware that it's a choice.
One of my really good friends pulled me aside and was like, hey, babe, we've not been hanging out a lot lately, but it's just because where I'm at financially, I feel like your plans are too expensive. And I was like, oh, interesting. Like having the mirror pointed back at you.
It's not for one person who earns the most to spend the money on everyone else, and it's not for the person who has the least not to show up.
Exactly.
It's first to meet in the middle, and that's, I think, grown friendships.
I am more of the team of everybody just pay.
Yeah, you know what you had.
Pay what you had.
And I've had so many arguments with waiters. They're like, but you're together. I said, okay, fine. Everyone go to individual tables. Now get the bill. But then there's a time I've done that because I'm like, it doesn't make sense.
okay. Now, normally you'd find in a lot of feminine friendships, and I say feminine because I'd have said women or female, but there's a lot of other guys, more so the gay ones, that kind of fall under this, that will find such a topic super interesting to talk about, and more so, particularly important, and, something that definitely needs to be talked about at length. But when you look at a lot of the masculine friendships that are out there, this isn't really a problem per se. Like the whole, I got broke and now, can my friendships be sustained, blah, blah, friendships for a season. Like, it's not really a thing for us guys. Now, granted, I am talking mostly about the genuine male friendships, mostly, but, a lot of guy friendships kind of fall under this sort of moniker where it's like the money isn't really going to be the biggest factor that separates us, because there's a lot of guy friendships that will last years and decades, just mainly because they chose to stick together and they've always been each other's homies and they've always had a certain amount of loyalty for each other, or at least to each other. And the interesting part about it is you find that money isn't usually the biggest factor. And this even goes beyond the whole being economically down or having cash. Probably you've lost a job, so you aren't doing too well, or you haven't just been doing too well financially for a pretty long time. And I think it's mostly because for us guys, we haven't had a problem sharing with the people that we value quite a bit. Just mostly because for us, it's sort of just in us. With a lot more women, you find that, like, even though y'all are the tightest of friends, when the bill comes after y'all have had lunch and on top of that everyone had like a cocktail each, people will split their bills down to the last cent. Like most babes, you will find whenever they're going for a meetup as female friends, they will split it down to the last cent. With guys, we'll get together, we'll sit down. If guys want to order a bottle, it's like, all right guys, how much does each person have? We'll see what we can get. And you find that with us guys, like, even though a homie of mine was to have lost his job, for months you'll find that if the guy doesn't have cash and me and a couple of our other friends are meeting up, I could literally just call the guy and be like, yo, let's head out. And the guy's like, nah, I'm not doing too good. And I'll be like, nah, you just come through, I'll sort you out, we'll figure this shit out. Then we'll go there, and by the time everyone sort of had their fun and guys want to now start handling the bill, either I'm clearing the bill or I'm gonna talk to one or two of my other friends and I'm like, yo, so we need to sort out so and we'll just come together and we'll clear it. And you could say to a certain degree, and I know this is mostly just me pulling it out of my ass, that most guys will share the spread in terms of value, mainly because for us as guys, it's been a thing for us, because when it came to providing for others or providing value to those of us that may not be doing as well but are close to us, it's sort of been expected for us to always come through. And when it translates to our friends, that also doesn't become a problem. And with women, there's always been this emphasis on retaining value. So ensuring that you and possibly your offspring are always taken care of is always going to be paramount. So yes, you could share for a bit, but the moment you feel like it's really digging in, you'll just cut it off and be like, nah, I really can't do that. Which is why I could probably get why a woman could probably feel like she's lost all her friends after she's lost her job, because the friends will continue planning as though everyone is still making the same amount. And then when she isn't able to come through, and she kind of has to sit things out because there's no one that's going to come and clear for her the bill like the way most guys normally do, she just starts to feel like she's being distanced, and eventually they almost always don't talk to each other for quite a while. And they're like, oh, we're no longer friends, blah, blah, blah. Or they'll talk about how the season of friendship ended or some shit like that. Not that I'm directly referring to what was said on that clip. And I feel like if a lot more women decided to look at a lot of guy friendships and see how we sort of carry ourselves as guys, they could learn a thing or two about trying to support their own. Now, granted, there are a lot more women nowadays that are helping each other out and are coming through for each other. But for the most part, I still feel like a lot of women are, I'm not going to say selfish, but are very self-serving, and usually are not willing to put themselves in harm's way, whether financially or in a resource type manner for other people. And sometimes it can make them look like fake friends, even though that's not necessarily the case. Although, granted, considering that a lot of what I've said I have pulled out of my ass, I may be wrong about that, but I'm going to leave it at that and move it on to our unpopular opinions of this episode. So, on to our very first unpopular opinion, which says, and I quote, "Most men deserve to be alone until they can resolve their emotional immaturity and their more toxic or violent traits. Like if there's even a chance that you'll have a quote-unquote bad day and get close to physically harming someone around you, you aren't ready for a relationship, period." End quote. Now, I actually disagree with what's been said here. Mainly it's because of the first sentence, but ideally that kind of makes everything almost invalid. The whole "most men deserve to be alone until they can resolve their emotional immaturity and their more toxic or violent traits," because I'd probably want to rewrite it as all, or if you want to say most men and women should probably not approach relationships until they can resolve their emotional immaturity and their more toxic or violent traits. The reason why I'm saying that is a lot of times people want to stick this to the men and be like, oh, if a man has a bad day and he physically harms you, blah, blah. But a lot of times people forget that women also commit domestic violence. Women also physically abuse their male partners. And I know that someone who's going to come out and be like, oh, but the stats for women who are victims of domestic abuse are much higher, and for men it's like 2 or 3%. But the reality of it is a lot of the cases of male domestic abuse aren't reported, and in as much as people never really point out this statistic, more than 2/3 of non-reciprocal domestic violence are carried out by women. And by non-reciprocal, I mean you are being hit but you're not hitting back. So there's a lot of guys who are in relationships where they're being hit and they're not hitting back, and because it goes unreported, or because someone's going to come and be like, oh, she was emotional, you need to understand where she was at, it suddenly seems as though the women are the non-issue and the men are the problem, which is why I have such a big problem with all of this. Like, if you feel like, or if you know that you have an issue with controlling your emotions and controlling yourself, I would recommend you at least trying to take some time so that you can learn to control yourself. Whether that is through therapy, whether that is through taking up something like martial arts. At the end of the day, if you can't control yourself at least 99% of the time, then how are you supposed to protect your partner from you? Because if you're in a situation where you may have to protect your partner from yourself, what tells us that you will be able to do that? Will you be able to hold back? Will you be able to not harm your partner because you are pissed off, or because you're under pressure, or because you felt betrayed, or because you're feeling stressed? What says that you'll be able to protect your partner from yourself? And this goes to both genders, because it's not like the men are the only ones who have to hold back. Even women have to learn to hold back. This whole thing of letting it go because she was emotional or she was going through something, like, it's not like us guys don't go through shit. It's not like us guys don't go through situations that can actually really wreck us on an emotional or on a deep level. Hell, even on a hormonal one. But we are required to hold back. And honestly, I feel like if women were held to the same standards as men are in terms of emotional control, then we'd probably have possibly fewer cases of domestic violence. Although that is going a little bit far field, so I'm just going to leave it there. But all in all, if you are going to get into the dating market, if you do want to get into a relationship, please make sure you check yourself. Can you protect your partner from you? Can you hold back? Can you control your emotions? Those are questions that you genuinely need to ask yourself before you decide to get into a relationship, or before you decide to commit in some way, shape, or form. But I may be wrong about this, but all in all, I am going to leave it at that and move it on to our very next unpopular opinion of this episode, which states, and I quote, "First date should be about getting to know one another. There's no shame in the first date just being coffee or a light lunch and just talking. Don't expect to be taken to a high-end restaurant and paid for when you're just as single as the other person is." End quote. Okay, I honestly don't feel like this is an unpopular opinion, or should be classified as an unpopular opinion, just mainly because I feel like for the first date, y'all are trying to get to know each other. Like, the best way to do that is if you dumb down a lot of the expectations. So if you exchange the high-end restaurant and the 5-course meal, or the 3-course meal, or the expensive meal for something like coffee or a light lunch, and just maybe taking a walk or just sitting down for a bit of time so that you guys can get to know each other and just talk, then you could probably make things a lot better, because if you guys aren't putting that much effort into the first date because you guys are just getting to know each other, then like say maybe from like day 2 or 3 going onwards, you guys decide to do something a little fancier because you guys are interested in each other, then at least it builds that anticipation and you can see someone at their normal and at their best so that you can decide if you want to be with them. And for the most part, when you listen to women that talk about going to a high-end restaurant or doing something fancy for the first date, for the most part, you actually realize that they're in it not for actually meeting and getting to know the person, but so that they can go out on a fancy date. Like, that's what they want to do. They want to go on a fancy first date. It's not even about getting to know the person all that much, which, when you kind of think about it, kind of defeats the purpose of the first date. So, you know, the lower the expectations, the lower the input, the better the results, in my opinion, at least for the first date. But I could be wrong about that, and maybe I am, but I am going to leave it at that and move it on to our next unpopular opinion of this episode, which says, and I quote, "The amount of options you have is down to how social you are. Social media apps has made people believe it's due to how attractive you are. There are a lot of attractive people with poor social skills that got no hoes." End quote. Now, hoes aside, this is actually very true. Now, I did discuss this to some degree in last week's episode, the more unpopular opinions one, where I was busy talking about how it's not really as much of a numbers game as people might think, but in some way, shape or form, you could say that whatever it is that I was saying does sort of contradict what's being said here. Now, when you kind of think about it, when you are looking at the idea of having options, yes, you could say that there's lots of fish in the sea, but how many people are you really approaching? How many people are you talking to? How many people are you going out with is definitely going to affect whether you have multiple options or not. Now, in last week's episode, I was busy talking about how, you know, the whole dating thing isn't a numbers game. But in this case, we're busy talking about options. So if we are talking about the numbers game, it's not down to how attractive you are. It's down to how social you are. There are women that I know that aren't that attractive, but they're super social and they have people that want to be with them. There's babes that I know that are super attractive, but because they do not interact with as many guys, because they barely interact with guys that could be interested in them or just meeting new people, you find that they will talk about how they don't have any options, their DMs are dry, blah, blah, blah. Yet the reality of it is, if you are more social as a person, then you definitely do open yourself up to being in a position where you can attract more people. But if you're not social and you're the type of person that will just do the whole work, home, maybe the supermarket every so often, then of course it does become harder for you to have options or even an option in the dating market. And I don't think I'm wrong for saying that. I think I'm totally right in saying it and explaining it the way I am, but I could be wrong, you know. Either way, I am going to leave it at that and move it on to our very final unpopular opinion of this episode, which says, and I quote, "A lot of people waste their time trying to trick someone that doesn't like them into dating them when there are a billion other fish in the sea." End quote. Interesting. We're going back to the whole like numbers game and, you know, fish in the sea and shit, which is pretty interesting. But, you know, let's just move on. Now, the whole waste time trying to trick someone that doesn't like them into dating them, I feel like that was a much more present and visible thing that people were seeing like 10, 15 years ago. I think it was more easily visible at the time. And in today's day and age, it's a lot harder for some people to see that, mainly because, one, we have a lot of yes men. Or should I say, we have a lot of people that do not know how to say no. We do not have that many people that know how to turn someone down. So instead of turning someone down, they just don't say anything and they continue receiving, or they continue allowing the quote unquote tricking to happen, so that, you know, eventually the person, as they hope, will either convert them, which is highly unlikely, or they'll eventually learn that said person isn't really interested in them. And the other option is because a lot of people today are highly exploitative. There's a lot of people today that just enjoy exploiting people just because that person likes them. And they exploit that person to their advantage and they gain. And as they continue to enjoy their gains, they decide to either take the gains to someone that they are interested in, not the interested party that is busy trying to do the tricking, or they will keep them and they will go after someone that is interested in them and let them enjoy the goods, whatever goods it is that you would think of. And that is probably the more common thing that happens nowadays, and it's the one that makes it so sad, and it kills stuff like chivalry. It really, really makes the whole intentionality of wanting to do something for someone so hard, because when you are interested in someone and you're going out of your way, you're trying to do stuff for them, you're trying to show them that you're interested and how much more, you can make their life easier. And as you're busy trying to do that, they're enjoying those benefits. They're not telling you that they're not interested in you. They're enjoying those benefits while they're letting someone else bang them, or they are expressing interest with someone else and they're giving them the most intimate, the most vulnerable, the nicest parts of themselves, which is actually very, very painful. And because no one wants to be the interested party in this entire triangle, you find that there's a lot more people that are giving a lot less, and there's a lot more people that are missing out because they are expecting someone should give more to them so that they can fully commit. And at the end of the day, you're finding that there's a lot of people that could have actually done pretty well with someone else, but because they did not feel like giving a certain amount, they did not feel like giving a certain input, because they did not want to be seen as the guy with the pie in the face or the woman with the pie in the face, then they just decided to hold back. Now, I'm not saying that you should go out there and try and be that kind of guy, but I can totally understand why people are like, you know what, just go for people that like you. And it's unfortunate that we're at a point where, the whole idea of expressing interest and justifying that expression of interest by, showing value is sort of looked at in a bad way. But it's an unfortunate reality in a world where most people are out there to gain from you or are just in it for the gain, and they're not really looking at the repercussions of what they're doing or the possible benefits that would have come if they'd have just told you no from the jump, and they wouldn't have had you invest so much just so that you can get hurt much later down the line. Although, then again, I could be wrong about this one, just the same I could be wrong about all the other unpopular opinions, so I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open. On X, it is at BagakaTheD. On Facebook, it is at The Breaktime Podcast. And on IG, it is at The Breaktime_podcast. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end, and I will catch you guys on the next break.
But what I believe is that if you put a pastor and a prostitute in one room, one is likely to convert the other.